Right now, the UK's national grid is pouring $1.75 billion into a gas power project. And, they aren't building it to supply homes and they aren't building it to keep local hospitals running.
No, it's highly targeted.
Exactly. That massive investment is specifically designed to support one company's AI data centers. And I think we tend to think of the digital world, like the internet, software, artificial intelligence, as this weightless, frictionless thing.
Right, like it just lives in the ether.
Yeah, you type a prompt and the world just snaps into place instantly. But underneath that seamless interface is a very heavy, incredibly demanding physical reality. So welcome to our latest deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are exploring a really fascinating stack of analytical reports focused on a specific window of time they call Week 27. We aren't looking at the standard news headlines today. We're looking at the world through a much more revealing lens, which is this concept of speed mismatches.
Yeah, and that framework is just crucial for understanding the structural shifts happening around us right now. I mean, we are living in an era where the AI economy, global financial markets, digital communications, they're all accelerating at breakneck speeds.
Almost too fast to track.
Right. But those fast-moving systems don't exist in a vacuum. They rest on a foundation of physical layers that move painfully slowly. So we're talking about power grids built decades ago, global shipping routes constrained by basic geography, physical climates, and, the localized cost of living.
So when a system that moves at the speed of light crashes into a system that moves at the speed of concrete, you get friction.
Exactly. You get structural friction.
I do want to make sure we set the right tone for the listener here, though, because talking about systemic friction can easily sound like, a disaster movie trailer.
Oh, for sure. And that is an important distinction to draw early on. This is not a story of doom. The world isn't collapsing. And as a quick disclaimer for everyone, this isn't investment advice, nor are we here to debate the ethics of AI or whether these technologies are inherently good or bad.
We're just looking at the mechanics of it.
Exactly. Our mission is simply to map out the architecture of this friction. We're looking at where the gap between the fast world and the slow world is widening, and really why you should care about how those hidden structural gaps eventually show up in your everyday life.
So let's start by unpacking that $1.75 billion gas plant in the UK, because honestly, artificial intelligence might be the most extreme example of this speed mismatch.
It really is.
When most people think of AI, they think of the cloud, right? They think of algorithms, chatbots, lines of code. It feels completely detached from the physical environment.
It does, but the reports make a very definitive structural point here. AI has evolved past being just a software issue. It is fundamentally an electricity phenomenon.
An electricity phenomenon.
Right. Yeah. To understand why, you really have to look at the mechanics of how AI actually works. I mean, traditional software is mostly about retrieving data. You click a link, a server sends a file, and you read it. It's pretty low impact.
Right. It's just fetching something that already exists.
Exactly. But AI, especially these large language models we're seeing, operates differently. It's probabilistically generating answers by processing massive amounts of data across, thousands of graphics processing units or GPUs.
Simultaneously.
Doing that all at once.
Right. And that parallel computing requires just an astonishing amount of continuous power.
And all that processing creates like an enormous amount of physical heat.
Which is a huge bottleneck, yeah. Because that heat then requires massive water consumption for advanced liquid cooling systems, vast tracts of land to house the server farms, and most importantly, direct access to regional power grids that are capable of delivering gigawatts of baseload power without any interruption.
So the cloud is literally tethered to the ground.
Very much so. The sources highlight the PJM regional grid in the United States as a prime example of this collision. So this is one of the largest power grids in the country, and they recently had to issue emergency orders.
Right.
Because you have this slow-moving physical reality, like a severe, lingering heat wave crashing directly into the surging, continuous electricity demand from all these new data centers.
And you have grid architecture that was largely conceptualized and built in the 20th century trying to absorb 21st century digital demands.
Which is a huge mismatch.
It's massive. Because getting permits for a new power plant, laying high-voltage transmission lines, physically upgrading substations, that takes a decade of planning and construction.
Right.
But a tech company can deploy a new, highly demanding AI model to 100 million users in a matter of weeks.
It's essentially like buying a Formula One car, but realizing the only infrastructure you have to drive it on is a dirt road.
That's a great way to put it.
I mean, the car wants to go 200 miles an hour, but the
Mm.
physical environment forces it to grind its gears and kick up rocks.
And the friction from those rocks eventually hits the consumer. Because when the fast AI layer demands power that the slow grid cannot easily or chiefly supply, regional power authorities have to compensate somehow.
What does that compensation look like?
Well, they do it by reactivating older, much more expensive peak power generation plants, often running on coal or gas, just to prevent localized blackouts.
Oh, wow. Meaning the structural friction shows up directly in a listener's monthly utility bill.
Exactly.
The digital layer captures all the speed and the profit of the AI boom, but the physical layer and the people living on it are forced to absorb the literal heat and the financial cost of keeping that whole system running.
And the wild thing is the electricity demand is only half of the physical bottleneck here.
Right. There's the hardware.
Exactly. You can't process AI without specialized semiconductors.
Yeah.
And the incredible demand for those chips is just completely rewiring global supply chains. But the reports point out that this hardware boom looks completely different depending on your vantage point in the economy.
I noticed that. South Korea's recent manufacturing data is a perfect illustration of this. Their exports, which are heavily driven by these advanced chips, just hit their strongest growth since 1978.
Yeah, it's historic.
And Samsung is projecting massive profits. But when you look at the mechanics of those profits, they aren't necessarily coming from, an effortless scaling of production. They are largely driven by extreme physical shortages of DRAM and NAND memory chips.
Right, because building a semiconductor fabrication plant, or a fab, is one of the most complex, capital-intensive engineering feats on the planet.
It's not just a regular factory.
Not at all. We're talking about atomic-level manufacturing in pristine clean rooms that take years and billions of dollars just to construct.
Yeah.
You cannot simply write a line of code to generate more chips.
You hit a physical wall.
Exactly. The physical limit of manufacturing has capped the supply, while the digital demand continues to skyrocket.
Which gives the manufacturers immense pricing power. I mean, if I'm an investor holding tech stocks, a supply constraint that allows a company to hike prices and double its profit margins is something to celebrate. The financial markets reward that scarcity.
And that dynamic exposes what the sources describe as a clash of operating mindsets.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, if you view the world through a purely financial lens, like an investor OS supply constraints and hardware shortages are fantastic news. In a market environment, scarcity equals value. High demand and limited supply means surging stock prices and a booming portfolio.
Wait, but if the market is celebrating the scarcity, what is the impact on someone who isn't trading semiconductor stocks?
Right.
Like, say I'm running a small graphic design business, or I manage the IT department for a regional logistics company. I still need that hardware to stay competitive.
Well, for the everyday life OS, the everyday consumer or small business owner, that exact same market boom acts as a heavy tax.
Because they're the ones buying it.
Exactly. The shortage translates directly into higher prices for laptops, physical terminals, servers. And beyond the hardware, it means significantly increased fees for cloud computing and software subscriptions, because the data centers are passing their higher infrastructure and electricity costs down the chain.
So the financial layer is moving fast and capturing the immediate value of the boom, while the everyday layer is left holding a much larger IT budget.
That's the friction, the underlying value of this AI revolution in terms of, practical cost-saving applications for the average person hasn't fully materialized yet.
We're paying for the build-out.
Right. The physical constraints, the shortage of memory chips, the strain on local power grids, and the massive capital expectations of investors are already squeezing the consumer. The fast-moving expectations of capital are actively taxing the slow-moving physical reality of production.
And building those multi-billion-dollar fabrication plants in South Korea and firing up those gas plants in the UK to power the data centers, I mean, all of that requires an immense amount of global energy.
Absolutely. The baseline of all this is energy.
The entire system is underpinned by oil and gas. And the sources take a really fascinating look at the global energy supply, specifically focusing on the Strait of Hormuz. Because on the surface, this massive, slow-moving physical layer currently looks incredibly stable.
It does. The reports highlight that OPEC Plus recently agreed to boost their output by 188,000 barrels a day. Alongside that, maritime transit through the Strait of Hormuz, which is one of the world's most critical geographic choke points for energy, has partially resumed amid some ongoing regional negotiations.
So things look calm.
Right. If you look purely at the price of oil on a financial terminal, it has remained relatively calm and flat.
But the sources warn that looking at a flat price chart and assuming the physical world is peaceful is a pretty dangerous illusion.
It is an illusion generated by the speed mismatch,
How so?
because financial markets are incredibly efficient at pricing in headlines. An algorithm sees a news alert about a slight output boost or a temporary negotiation, and within milliseconds, the price of crude oil adjusts and stabilizes.
The chart flattens out.
Right. But the physical reality of the Strait of Hormuz does not operate in milliseconds. It's a highly complex physical and geopolitical shock absorber.
When we talk about it being a shock absorber, I mean, we're looking at all the overlapping, slow-moving realities required to actually move a physical barrel of oil from one side of the world to the other.
Exactly. It's not just a trade on a screen.
You have to secure physical shipping rights. You have to establish and maintain naval deterrence. You have to negotiate massive insurance premiums for physical oil tankers that are navigating a risk zone. And you have to navigate the deep historical sovereignty issues of the nations bordering the water.
And none of those physical or diplomatic realities can be resolved at the speed of a stock trade.
Right.
Financial markets price in the concept of stability almost instantly. But rebuilding physical trust between rival nations, de-escalating naval tension, reestablishing long-term shipping infrastructure, and, convincing marine actuaries to lower insurance risk, that takes years.
So what we're looking at isn't true stability. It's more like a compressed spring.
That's the perfect analogy.
The underlying geopolitical and physical tensions haven't vanished. The metal is still under immense pressure. It's just being temporarily pinned down by a combination of ongoing negotiations and, maybe slightly weaker global demand.
But the potential energy is all still there. What we are witnessing is market stability, not physical stability.
Wow, market stability versus physical stability.
Right, because financial systems can declare peace in an afternoon. But if that compressed spring slips, the market will reprice the risk instantly, while the physical world, the supply chains, the tankers, the actual flow of energy will take the massive brunt of the kinetic impact.
And when you trace the flow of that global energy, it eventually crashes directly into local economies.
Always does.
And the sources highlight the Japanese yen as a really powerful case study of what happens when rapid global financial markets collide with the slow reality of a household budget.
Japan presents a perfect example of this friction. The dollar-yen exchange rate recently hit the 162 range. And to give it some historical context, those are levels the currency hasn't seen since 1986.
A 40-year low.
Yeah.
But, if you're living your life in Tokyo or Osaka, you aren't actively trading Forex. You're commuting to work, you're buying groceries, you're paying your utility bills. How does a macroeconomic shift in interest rate differentials actually land on a kitchen table?
Well, you have to look at how Japan interacts with the global physical layer. Japan imports over 90% of its energy, heavily relying on oil and liquefied natural gas.
That's huge.
It is. And it also imports a massive percentage of its food supply. So when the global financial policy layer moves, like when the U.S. keeps interest rates high while Japan keeps them low, capital flows instantly toward the dollar.
Because investors want the higher yield.
Exactly. The currency market devalues the yen in milliseconds. But the household doesn't feel that devaluation instantly.
Right. It's a delayed creeping pressure.
Yeah, it takes months for a weak currency to physically manifest in the supply chain. But eventually, it shows up as higher costs for imported wheat at the supermarket. It shows up as more expensive fuel at the local gas pump.
And the utility bills?
Right, it drives up electricity bills because the power companies are paying more for that imported natural gas. It raises the baseline operating costs for any small business relying on imported raw materials.
So the friction here is that the financial reality and the household reality are just fundamentally out of sync.
Completely.
A household cannot increase its income or adapt its daily consumption at the speed the global currency market devalues its purchasing power.
And so the household ends up acting as a slow-moving physical buffer, trying to absorb the shocks of a high-speed financial system.
Which is exhausting.
It is. The pain isn't a sudden crash. It's a quiet, heavy, accumulating burden on the cost of daily living. The financial shock absorbers of the middle class are just slowly worn down.
And when you look at all this global industrial activity, the massive power draw of data centers, the energy required for global manufacturing, the complex shipping networks, the ultimate physical layer absorbing the impact of our economic speed is the climate itself.
It's the final buffer.
Exactly. The reports focus heavily on recent events in Europe to illustrate the harsh physical limits of our environment.
And these examples are striking. The sources detail severe European heat waves, noting extended periods where temperatures crossed 40 degrees Celsius, which is roughly 104 degrees Fahrenheit.
In places not built for it.
Right. They highlight extreme ground temperatures and wildfires that force the Tour de France to physically alter its Stage 3 route just to keep cyclists away from the smoke and the melting asphalt.
I mean, the immediate reaction for many people is to look at those temperatures and think, well, it's summer, heat waves happen, wildfires occasionally alter sporting events. Why is this fundamentally different from typical seasonal weather patterns?
The reports strongly warn against dismissing these events as just seasonal noise. What these heat waves expose is a deep structural failure in our ability to adapt our physical environment. Think about it. Europe is widely recognized as a global leader in decarbonization policies. They set ambitious emissions targets, they pass green legislation, and they invest in renewables.
Which is the paradox, right? If they're leading in green policy, why are the cities struggling so much with the heat?
Because passing a decarbonization law or signing a climate treaty is a bureaucratic policy layer. It can move relatively quickly on paper.
A stroke of a pen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what the heat waves expose is the massive speed mismatch between that fast policy layer and the painstakingly slow process of actually adapting centuries-old physical cities to a hotter reality.
Right. Reaching a political consensus takes months. But retrofitting a Parisian apartment block with heat pumps or redesigning an entire urban rail network so the steel tracks don't buckle in 40-degree heat, that takes decades.
Decades. And we're seeing the failure of what you might call the adaptation OS. These heat waves are fundamentally altering urban operating conditions.
It's not just sweating a bit more.
No, this isn't just about uncomfortable weather. It is about infrastructure actively failing. When temperatures stay that high, outdoor labor in construction and agriculture has to be halted for safety, which disrupts local economies.
Hospitals get overrun.
Hospitals become overwhelmed with heat-related illnesses. And the elderly population, many of whom live in traditional, unair-conditioned European housing built for a much cooler century, they face acute danger.
So the everyday infrastructure, the transit systems, the hospitals, the housing stock, simply cannot be physically rebuilt or adapted as fast as the climate is changing around it.
And can't keep up.
The physical blueprint of the city is literally cracking under the pressure of a new thermal reality.
And when you synthesize all of these seemingly disparate events from week 27, the stress on the PJM power grid, the chip shortages in South Korea, the illusion of stability in the Strait of Hormuz, the 40-year low of the Japanese yen, and the melting asphalt in Europe, a singular, coherent structural picture really emerges.
It really does. Because the common denominator isn't that the systems are breaking randomly. It's that the physical world is being forced to bend backward to compensate for the speed of the digital and financial worlds.
Exactly. The reports refer to this as the exposure of hidden compensation structures.
Hidden compensation structures.
Yeah. The low-speed layers, regional power grids, household budgets, the middle-class urban infrastructure, they are desperately acting as shock absorbers. They are bearing the weight and the friction generated by high-speed layers like AI and algorithmic global finance.
Which brings us to the core thesis of our sources today, and I think it perfectly captures this entire dynamic. The reports state, the world has not simply become faster. Rather, the gap between layers that move quickly and layers that can only move slowly has become easier to see.
And that gap has always existed, right? Policies always move faster than construction. Finance has always moved faster than logistics. But the extreme acceleration of things like artificial intelligence and global capital flows has widened that gap to the point where the friction is just impossible to ignore.
It's everywhere you look. We spent this deep dive looking at global power grids, international supply chains, and macroeconomic shifts. But I want to leave you, our listener, with a thought to apply to your own life. Because we all have our own internal speed mismatches. Think about it. Where are you forcing a fast digital mindset like demanding instant results, being hyperconnected, reacting to every single notification that is secretly burning out your slow physical reality, your health, your depth of attention, or your connections with your community? Where is the speed mismatch in your own world and what is currently acting as the shock absorber? Something to mull over until next time.